Looking for a new playmat or some custom sleeves? You can support Magic Untapped in the process by clicking on the affiliate link for Inked Gaming in the description. On February 4, 2011, the 54th Magic: The Gathering expansion, Mirrodin Besieged, released, bringing with it 155 cards, all but 3 new, and continuing, card-wise, the overall story of Magic's Scars block, where about its predecessor, Scars of Mirrodin, was about a Mirrodin with hints of corruption. Mirrodin Besieged focused on the active conflict between the plane's natives and the invading infectious Phyrexians.
So we had a first set that introduced Mirrodin, and mostly as Mirrodin. Hey, we got to revisit Mirrodin. We got to learn this place before we take it over. We got to meet it all over again. We had just enough Phyrexian so you understand the threat is there. The second set would be half and half, a war between the two sides. The third set would be the victor. That's the setup.
Story-wise, the set was essentially the latter half of the block's one and only novel, Scars of Mirrodin: Quest for Karn, by author Robert B. Wintermute. If you're unfamiliar with the novel, we give a rather thorough summary of its goings-on in our previous Magic history video on the set Scars of Mirrodin. Please feel free to go check it out if you haven't yet. As for this video, let's move on, shall we?
Oh, please do.
As Mark Rosewater, Magic the Gathering's head designer, mentioned, Mirrodin Besieged was made to represent a two-sided war against the Phyrexians and the native Mirran population. As such, the set's pre-release and release parties featured a special type of booster pack, called a faction pack, that contained cards only from one faction or the other, requiring players to choose between the war's two sides for deck-building purposes. Similarly, the set's event decks were also separated between the factions, with a mono-red deck representing the Mirran resistance, and a blue-black deck taking the role of the invading Phyrexians.
So this was the war. This was a war between the Mirrans and the Phyrexians. So what we did was, there were 2 new mechanics. One was a Phyrexian mechanic, one was a Mirran mechanic. The Phyrexian mechanic was the living weapon, and those were equipment that came into play attached to a 0/0 germ, I think a little black creature, but essentially they came living, they were alive. Battle Cry was a combat mechanic that when you attack with a creature, it boosted all the other attacking creatures, and that was the Mirran mechanic.
Beyond those 2 mechanics, Wizards of the Coast also carried over most of the mechanics from the Mirrodin Besieged predecessor, Scars of Mirrodin: Middlecraft, Proliferate, and Infect. A new theme of mirrored pairs is also introduced in the set, that is, cards from each faction mirroring one another, such as the cards Peace Strider and Pure Strider, and Mirran Crusader and Phyrexian Crusader. Furthermore, some of these mirrored pairs go cross-set as pseudo-callbacks to cards from the original Mirrodin block, such as Viridian Shaman and Viridian Corruptor, Darksteel Colossus and Blightsteel Colossus, and Inkmoth Nexus and Blinkmoth Nexus. Cards such as these were done to exhibit the new Phyrexia's spreading corruption over Mirrodin. Also, a new rules term came into being with Mirrodin Besieged: Poisoned. As in, a player is poisoned if they have any poison counters. As a small set, Mirrodin Besieged did not have much in the way of cycles. In fact, it had fewer than you might expect. 2, to be exact. Okay, technically 3. Those are Zeniths, which are a cycle of rare spells with X in their casting costs that each refer to the plane of Mirrodin's 5 mono-colored suns. As such, each have their own color-specific ability before being shoveled back into their owner's library rather than being sent to the graveyard as normal, such as the card Blue Sun's Zenith, letting players draw X cards. Color-aligned artifact creatures. Like in Scars of Mirrodin, Mirrodin Besieged contains a cycle of common artifact creatures, each with an activated ability that includes a colored cost. An example of this is Gust Skimmer, which, for the cost of 1 blue mana, can gain flying until end of turn. And basic lands. No, really. While almost unheard of for a small set to contain its own basic lands, Mirrodin Besieged did, if nothing else to visually show the basic lands of Scars of Mirrodin being corrupted into Phyrexian-looking biomes. Mirrodin Besieged, as could be expected, had a handful of cards worth mentioning, whether it be value-wise or gameplay-wise, and that includes the aforementioned Blightsteel Colossus, which can be quite the finisher in EDH, Consecrated Sphinx, a large and effective blue flyer. The card also gives its controller good card advantage. Go for the Throat, an efficient creature-killing card that saw widespread use in Standard at the time. Green Sun Zenith, one of the set's Zenith cycle of cards. The card functioned as an early mono-ramp spell by searching out the Future Sight card Dryad Arbor, but could also be used late game to fish out a deck's finisher. The card wound up becoming banned in Modern in September of 2011. Inkmoth Nexus, still a backbone of poison-based strategies that can attack as soon as turn 2. Massacre Worm, a once powerful pseudo-finisher and pseudo-board wipe that has fallen out of favor thanks to the Innistrad Midnight Hunt card, the Meathook Massacre. Phyrexian Revoker, essentially a pithing needle, but with legs. It sees play today in Modern and Legacy Death and Taxes and Affinity builds. Sword of Feast and Famine, yet another entry into Magic's Sword of X and Y series. The card was part of the reason the cards Stoneforge Mystic and Jason Mind Sculptor received bans in a number of formats, though both of these cards have since been unbanned in their relative formats. And Tezzeret, Agent of Bolas, a fairly popular Oathbreaker commander for artifact-centric decks. As far as competitive Magic goes, Mirrodin Besieged was front and center in Pro Tour Paris in mid-February of 2011, which was a Standard and Scars/Besieged draft event.
So Mirrodin Besieged had just come out, so it was a booster draft with the two sets in the block that were out, and Standard. So Ben Stark of the United States defeated Paul Rietzel of the United States 3-1. Both those names are, I think at the time, future Hall of Famers, but both of them are currently in the Hall of Fame. So it was a very high-octane match. But it was not the only high-octane match of that weekend.
Indeed, Pro Tour Paris also had a Player of the Year showdown, because there were two players tied for Player of the Year in 2010. American Brad Nelson and Frenchman Guillermo Magnan, and decks that included Scars of Mirrodin cards, despite the fact that they were playing in the tiebreaker for a year that preceded the set's release.
They played, I think it was best of 7, because my notes here say that Brad Nelson was victorious 4-2, which implies best of 7. So, but anyway, there was a mighty fight, and Brad Nelson walked away Pro Player of the Year for 2010.
So do you have fond memories of Mirrodin Besieged to share with the rest of the class? Let us know your thoughts and memories in the comments section below. Also, if you enjoyed this video, please give the video a like and remember to subscribe to Magic Untapped here on YouTube. Also, if you haven't already done so, please toss a buck in our Patreon tip jar to support future videos like this. Thank you very much for watching.